Hello, and welcome to Temple of the Falls Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I scared Bruce. I'm Andy.
Yeah, I'm Bruce.
I'm in such like a dungeony, dark. I mean, it helps that days now are like 10 hours long, and just
nice start is at like 3:30 in the afternoon.
I wake up, the sun hasn't come up, and I get out of work, and the sun has gone down.
See, luckily for me, I work in my house, and honestly, I've got one window because I happen to work in the hallway because I'm still doing the work from home thing. So I do see the daylight occasionally.
Yeah, I miss the daylight, if only because driving home from work, like I love commuting. Yeah. I get to sit down, listen to podcasts, whatever. I mean, I get to do that at work as well. I just put an earbud in, tune everybody out, listen to it. Speaking of dungeons, we enter our second half of this season. Final quarter. We turn around. We come around turn 4, I guess.
Sure.
To the last straightaway of the season. I don't watch racing. I don't know why I did this metaphor. But we've got a cool new deck tech or DeckTale, like the cartoon.
Yes.
DuckTale. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, Bruce, you brought us Grenzo, Dungeon Warden.
I have.
Let me read it.
Yeah.
Let me read that card. Grenzo, Dungeon Warden, for X Black-Red 2/2. Legendary creature, Goblin Rogue. Grenzo, Dungeon Warden, enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and then has an activated ability of 2. Put the bottom card of your library into your graveyard. If it's a creature card with a power less than or equal to Grenzo's power, put it onto the battlefield. Very cool.
It's wild. Okay. The key with Grenzo, or I shouldn't say that. Grenzo sounds like a deck that is very niche. Like, how many possible builds could you get with a card like this?
Mm-hmm.
It's looking for creatures on the bottom of your library. So there must be a significant limit on the kind of decks. I will say that I think that there are 3 major deck types with Grenzo.
Okay.
The first one, Goblin Tribal. I've seen a number of Grenzo decks where it's just Grenzo, a lot of goblins, and you're just churning them out. So you're casting them from your hand, you're flipping them off the bottom. For the most part, you can choose to make Grenzo however big you want because he has X in the cost. But they make it big enough so that you can flip goblins off the bottom of your library.
I mean, even for X equals 0, you could probably hit most goblins.
Right, because Grenzo does start as a 2/2.
With a face like that, I somehow forgot he was a goblin. I always forget he's a goblin.
Well, that's because 2 of my favorite decks are run by goblins, but I don't follow any goblin theme with them.
Made by a goblin.
Old Buzzbark is also a goblin.
Ooh.
But it's had no effect in the cards that I've chosen.
Yeah. It's interesting. We've been doing this now for 45 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
No, 40. This is 48. And we've gone through a number of your decks, and it hit us between seasons that we didn't talk about this deck yet. We've brought it up plenty of times, but this is like peak Bruce to me, at least. Like I think about Grenzo and I think about Bruce. Same way I do about Buzzbark, same way I do about Krond, I guess.
Yeah.
He'll get his own episode soon, I'm sure.
Someday. And everybody feels the same way.
Mm-hmm.
I built Grenzo, and it was one of the decks that I carried with me when I went out to do a lot of events. When I was going out to some of the bigger events and hitting a number of these markets. And it wasn't a deck that a lot of other people were playing.
Yeah. I may be presumptuous here, but there have been plenty of times where I've been trying to find like a good commander. Just like start with the commander and then go to the deck.
Mm-hmm.
And searching for commanders, it occurred to me, go to the multiplayer sets. So we've got, Battle Bond, we've got Conspiracy. And correct me if I'm wrong, Grenzo's Conspiracy.
Yes.
So, like, I've gone through so many versions of decks. I've gone through so many, like, starts of decks where I'm like, oh, yeah, I could do a Conspiracy commander. Haven't gotten there yet, but I'll get
You better hurry, because I'm working my way through virtually all of them. Conspiracy is one of my favorite sets.
Yeah.
And I have built... I built Grenzo, Queen Marchesa, Marchesa the Black Rose. I built online. I built a version of Muzio.
Mono blue.
Yes.
Yeah.
And who else have I built? Brago.
Oh,
Eternal.
yes, of course.
And I think there's at least one other that I built. Mm-hmm. But when I saw Grenzo, what made me want to build the deck was just the idea that it's something that I had never ever seen any other card do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who takes advantage of the bottom of your library? That's supposed to be an area where you have no control over. It's just sheer randomness and crazy, and who knows what's at the bottom, and that you have no way to set that up.
Yeah.
Now, when we start going through the cards, we're going to find that's not quite true, but.
Yeah.
It's, it would definitely leaned in, and what I've found with the deck is that it really does encourage you to go outside the usual cards.
Mm.
A lot of the cards in this deck are not your usual commander fare, just because, I am looking for creatures that have a low power and toughness. Because I don't want to make Grenzo big. I want to spend the mana flipping cards off the bottom of the library. So we've gone that route. And of course, then you're also looking for a lot of the other cards that we're about to talk about. So
yeah. So tell us what's the ideal like play pattern with Grenzo?
All right. So for my Grenzo deck, the ideal play pattern is you want to get Grenzo early.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to see some mana rocks early. More importantly, though, I want to see Grenzo out, and ideally Hearthstone. It's not even a secret. It's one of the key cards to the deck. If you're running Grenzo without Hearthstone, you're going to be in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, Hearthstone is a 3-mana artifact. The cost of each creature ability requiring an activation cost is reduced by 1. This cannot reduce an ability's generic mana cost to less than 1.
Essentially, that is the Oracle text. What it basically says is Grenzo costs 2 mana to flip the bottom card of your library into your graveyard. With Hearthstone, it goes down to 1. You've reduced it by half. So imagine that every single one of the cards in your deck, the cost has been reduced by half, because that's what you're getting with Hearthstone in this deck. So it's huge. So ideally you want to get to that point. You want to get a lot of mana out. So if you can get Cryptghast, if you can get rocks, if you can just get more land, as much land into play as possible, then ideally what you want is at the end of your last opponent's turn, you want to activate Grenzo's ability. Pay the 2, flip the card, hope that it's a creature, put it into play, and do it as much as you have mana available.
Don't waste it.
Yeah, well, exactly. There's no reason for it to be sitting there and not getting unused at this point, so use it.
It's especially nice with, Wraths being generally sorceries.
Right.
So you're getting around that. Also, it's about to be your turn, so they don't need haste. They just get out there and go.
Yeah. There aren't that many creatures in this deck that have haste, and Grenzo's ability doesn't give them haste. So don't think this isn't, put the creature out, you've got 1 turn, swing, and then your creature disappears. No, these creatures are here. They're on the board. You put them out there. You're getting the enter the battlefield trigger. You're getting everything, and they stay there. So you do want to, you do want to attack with them right away. So better to do that at the end.
I think what's nice too is that because they are such low power, generally,
right?
They're not wholly going to be specific targets of removal.
Right.
You're generally getting it for its ETB. And if it dies, well, that's not so bad either.
Now, just so everyone understands, for my deck, I'm looking to make Grenzo a 3/3.
Okay.
So the X on Grenzo for me is 1. So I'll give it 1+1/+1 counter, makes it into a 3/3, and that makes it able to cast all the creatures in my deck. So the creatures in my deck are all at most 3 power, or they have a variable in their power, which is sort of a way to get around that, because the variable is deemed to be 0 whenever it gets cast.
Right.
So it works out fairly well. But that's part of the reason why so many of the why a lot of the creatures in my deck are smaller, and I do look for enter the battlefield triggers or something that's quirky or bizarre about them,
right?
To make that go. So
yeah, I really I like the idea that you can get him out on turn 2 if you really want. Like it's not hard to get him out turn 2.
No.
I mean, obviously, if you want X to be 0, and you have a lot of 2-power creatures in here.
Yeah. You can take your chance with that.
Yeah. Especially early game.
Right.
If somebody has a really threatening commander.
And in the first version of this deck, a first version of Grenzo that I built, I had a number of 4/4 creatures. I had a handful of 4/4 dragons in the deck. And so Grenzo was coming in as a 4/4 because I wanted to be sure I could cast them. However, if worse came to worse, you could cast them as a 3/3. There were only about 4, maybe 5 creatures that were 4/4. So you could take your chance, run them a little smaller, flip cards, and hope you didn't hit the dragon. Or if you did, then it sat in the graveyard and you made it work. So, however, while I will say that another way to build the deck is chaotic, where it's exactly what I've just described. As much mana as you can get, you're flipping creatures as fast as you can, or you're flipping blindly off the bottom of your deck. Whatever happens to be there is what you get. For that kind of a Grenzo deck, you really are leaning onto your creatures. You want to make 40, maybe 50% of your deck creatures because you want to hit. Loading it up with enchantments and spells and artifacts. These are cards that are just dead weight when you start flipping off the bottom.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go chaotic, then that's what you have to. Then that's the sort of setup you want.
Yeah, there've definitely been, plenty of games where I'm like watching you just flip lands from the bottom, and I'm like, ooh.
And that's going to happen. However, my deck is built to be much more of a control deck, as control as a Rakdos deck gets, I guess. It's more of a control deck in that I try and know what's on the bottom of my library so that I can flip, so I know what I'm about to pay 2 for.
Right.
Now, there are a variety of ways to make this happen. The easiest and I think most obvious for the average person who's thinking about the deck for the first time is Scry. Look at the top card. You can either put it back or put it on the bottom. Everybody always repeats it as, look at the top card. If you want it, keep it on top. If you don't want it, you throw it on the bottom. In Grenzo, it's look at the top card. If it's a creature, put it on the bottom. If it's anything else, leave it on top.
Yeah.
And even sometimes I will put an artifact on the bottom because I'm desperate for land. And I need to find the land. So I will scry down just to get to land, knowing that, there's a whammy at the bottom now. But
it's two mana to get past. Or just one.
Or just one, yes.
But
so there's a handful of ways to scry. I've got Viscera Seer, Crystal Ball, and Seer's Lantern, among others. I've got a couple of lands that also come into play or enter the battlefield and scry. But while scry is nice, there are better and more effective ways to make this deck run.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got a whole host of them. The best pair is Canal Dredger and Epitaph Golem. The Dredger is tapped to put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. So with
wow.
this, right. So most of the time what this means is I'm going to take a creature that has died because...
That's what they do.
Right. That's what they do.
It's what they do best, honestly.
Right. So they die. So it dies, and then I can then tap this and put a creature on the bottom of my library. Now that's the full cost, is tapping this creature. So at the end of my opponent's turn, if a creature is dead, I can tap, put that creature on the bottom, pay 2, flip it back into play, get the enter the battlefield trigger, and it is ready to go and attack on my turn. This creates a lot of ugly loops with, so if I've got a creature that can destroy creatures, this is a nice way to get that done. If I've got a creature that you sacrifice to get a benefit, well, then you sacrifice it, it goes to the graveyard, you tap the dredger, you put it underneath, you spend the 2, it comes back out. You can then sack it again. But the dredger only lets you handle that once because it taps. But Epitaph Golem, its ability is you spend 2, put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. There's no tapping here. It's a mana cost. It costs 2. So your creature's dead. You spend 2 to put it on the bottom. You spend 2 more. You can put it back out onto the battlefield.
That's pretty good for 4 mana. Or with
2 with Heartstone.
Amazing.
Yeah. So again, if you've got creatures that sacrifice, you can do loops like this. And with Heartstone, it's only costing 2.
Do you have the altar in here?
I do not.
Because then you just get like an infinite loop.
Right. Well, 1, I'm not going for the infinite loop. And 2, what I do find is even when that option is out there, it doesn't really play in very often.
Right. You need an outlet for whatever the...
Right. And a lot of times you need the sack outlet. That's part of the reason Viscera is there. Sack a creature, scry 1. So...
Yeah, that plays in doubly to your
so
plan.
Not only can I... If I look at after I've scried, I can then put a creature on the bottom and then take the creature that I just sacrificed, spend 2 to put it on the bottom. Now I've got 2 creatures there. I can spend 2 twice and put them out. Now, you can start to see why Heartstone's important, because what I just described costs 6 mana. With Heartstone, it costs 3.
It's 6 mana, but it's at instant speed. It's at
right, and then you're not required to do it all at once.
Spread
it out.
Yeah, putting the things on the bottom of the library. There have been plenty of times that I got where you've put something on the library, let it sit there for a couple turns, and then the moment
it
strikes, you put it from the graveyard onto the bottom of the library.
Yeah, and then just waited.
Just wait.
Yeah.
And then when moment strikes, you put it out, and people are like, crap.
Right, and this is the benefit of knowing what's on the bottom of your library, because if it's sitting there and I know what it is, usually there's an enter the battlefield trigger. Now, if it is, say Shriekmaw. So if I know Shriekmaw is at the bottom of my library, I don't really want to play it until I know that you've got a creature I want dead. That Shriekmaw can kill. So I can wait. It doesn't have to happen right away. So you can hold off a little bit, spend the mana on the cards in your hand, or setting up the board better, or doing whatever else. But that's just Canal Dredger and Epitaph Golem. There's Tel'Jalad Stylus, which is put target permanent you own on the bottom of your library. There's the Rito Lantern.
Just completely forego the graveyard altogether.
Yeah, just skip that part. Rito Lantern, put target card in a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. Now this one costs 3, but it doesn't specify your graveyard.
Yes.
So the whole point of this card is to take cards out of your opponent's graveyards and put them in the bottom of their library, because that essentially exiles them.
Right. Because they're especially if you're playing against anybody who does any graveyard shenanigans, it's great.
Like most players. The key, though, or the joy with the Rito Lantern is in this deck, everybody reads it and thinks, oh no, nobody thinks about their own graveyard. And to be fair, I almost never target somebody else's graveyard, but it's there and it could happen. Junk Troller, again, is another one. Put target card in a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. So it does the same thing as a Lantern, but you have to tap the Junk Troller to do that. And then there's a handful of other cards. I put Mind Moil in here as another card that does this. Whenever you play a spell, put the cards in your hand on the bottom of your library in any order, then draw that many cards. It's worked okay. The problem is that if you can't get all of the non-creature cards out of your hand, then you're sticking yourself with at least one card that's going to not work out well for you.
Yeah, and like it is helpful to just basically know what is on the bottom of your library. Let's talk about your secret weapon in this category.
So, when you play out Spine Rock Knoll in your decks, and this is for anybody listening, we all know it's got Hideaway. You draw your 4 cards, or you look at the top 4 cards. You're not drawing them.
Right.
You pick the one you want the most. You put it under Spine Rock Knoll, and then you take the other 3 cards, throw them on the bottom of your library.
Yeah. So it says Hideaway. This land comes into play tapped. Great. When it does, look at the top 4 cards of your library. Remove one of them from the game face down. Exile it under this card, essentially. Then put the rest on the bottom of your library.
Right. Now, with Grenzo, what this reads is, look at the top 4 cards. Pick the one that isn't a creature and put that underneath the Spine Rock Knoll. Take the creatures, hopefully 3 creatures, and put them on the bottom of your library. Now, yeah, there are limits, obviously. I mean, if you're unlucky enough and you get a land and an enchantment with 2 creatures, well, either the land or the enchantment's got to go with the creatures to the bottom of your library.
Right.
But it doesn't say in any order. You pick the order. So you can put the creature at the bottom.
Yeah, you don't have to randomize it first.
Right. So you can do that. Now, that's Spine Rock Knoll, so people can see the benefit of this, and then they also say to themselves, ooh, and if I pay the red, I'll get the card back. Well, that's
you do 7. Or I guess
right,
you don't even have to do 7.
No, somebody has to do 7 points of damage.
Right.
With Spine Rock Knoll, you do get the card if you want it.
Right.
Now, the other one I'm running is Howltooth Hollow. It's it's just another Hideaway land. But with Howltooth Hollow, you're exiling a card.
Yeah.
Because you're never going to get the ability.
So Spine Rock Knoll's ability is you may play for red and a tap, you may play the removed card without paying its mana cost if an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage this turn. Howltooth Hollow is black and tap. You may play the removed card without paying its mana cost if each player has no cards in hand.
Right, because Howltooth Hollow is obviously designed with multiplayer in mind. No, nobody should run Howltooth Hollow.
Also, if you have no cards in hand as well, then
yeah. So, yeah. So realistically, whatever you're putting under Howltooth Hollow is not something you're ever going to get back. So, but honestly, I don't care. I get to look at 4 cards and put 3 of them in any order that I choose on the bottom of my library. This is good.
Yeah.
This is really good for Grenzo. And it's interesting because you watch people and the first time they play this, they play the deck. They're playing this out and I'll reach across the table and remind them, don't put a creature underneath this thing. This is not there for your best card. Put your creatures on the bottom of your library. That's why it's in there. Because it's not intuitive until you've done it.
Yeah.
And then you flip a card and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
And then you suddenly realize just how good these lands are.
And even if you end up putting 3 lands on the bottom, at least you have the information that there are 3 lands on the bottom. You either have to pay 6 to get through them or don't.
Right.
Activate until you do end up putting a creature down there.
Right.
Which, like, obviously, toward middle to late game, you are going to end up having a lot of mana untapped when it comes back to you. So just dump it all in there to just get everything back in your graveyard.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. It's fun because a card like Howltooth Hollow is a card that everybody reads. Because they're wondering, what are you doing with this? And it isn't until, I've played against people who haven't played against this deck before. And when Howltooth Hollow comes out, they reach over to grab the card and they look at it and they look at me because they know you're never going to get this card. And then they watch as I smile and set the cards up underneath my library in exactly the order I want. And it's like, suddenly it all dawns, and it's just such a great card for that.
It's so good.
So, Howltooth Hollow and Spinerock Knoll are two cards that are never coming out of this deck.
Yeah. There are two other... So there's another one that really helps out setting up the bottom of the library. Just in general, because of just the way the card works. And there's another, really... I hesitate to say spicy card, but very good. But let's take a break real quick. When we come back, we'll talk about those two cards, go into some of the more interesting cards, and kind of finish it up with just kind of a general overview of the excellency that is the Grenzo build that has been honing itself for 4 years?
Many years.
Be right back. This episode of Time for the False Pod is brought to you by Crypt Gas. Fart like farts. It's a fart joke.
Dead fart.
Dead fart. This episode of
Temple
of False Pod is brought to you by Dead Fart.
Oh, boo.
Boo. Like a ghost.
Boo.
Boo.
Like a crypt
Also,
gas.
that kind of sounded like a dead fart. Now back to you. Wow. Okay. That was...
ghastly.
Oh, very nice. So let's build it up. Next card we're talking about, Chainer, Nightmare Adept.
Yes.
Chainer, Nightmare Adept is...
Sure. It's a 4 mana. It's a black and a red. It's a 3/2 creature, and it reads, discard a card. You may cast a creature card from your graveyard this turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. Yeah, that's cute. Let's get to the real part. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste until your next turn. Which means, when I discard a card for the first ability and I can take a creature from my graveyard, you can cast a creature from my graveyard. So then I can pay the mana for the full price to cast it out from my graveyard, and it gets haste. Awesome!
Which is great. If the creature doesn't have haste, you can discard it and then immediately play it from your graveyard.
Right.
Because the paying price is the discard.
Yes.
It's amazing with Sir Conrad. But with this deck...
With this deck, when it enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, every single card that Grenzo gets is a card that's not cast from your hand. And they're all non-token creatures. They all enter the battlefield under your control. So they all get haste. Now, I've already said that at the end of your turn is when you should be casting these things. Well, haste means I can cast it any time. But more importantly, what happens is if I've got 6 mana at the end of my turn, I can now flip over the bottom 3 cards. And then at the start of my turn, play another land. Now I've got 8.
No.
Whatever. I get to flip 3 more. And I can do it right away. And now suddenly I could have up to 6 creatures that you didn't know about 3 seconds ago that all have haste. So they can all attack right away. This sort of hit is way harsher. Way harsher than you realize. And to be fair, I dismissed the first half of this card. It does say discard a card.
Yeah, which plays into just being able to get things back out.
Right. So if I have been unfortunate enough to draw Meteor Golem, well, I can spend 7 to play him, or I can just discard him to the graveyard.
Yeah, and then use the stylus to put it...
Exactly.
Or I guess the stylus, whatever.
I can use any number of abilities to take the card out of the graveyard, put it on the bottom of my library, and then pay 2. So even if I'm using Epitaph Golem, which costs 2, well, okay, fine. Now I spent 4 to play it instead of the 7 that Meteor Golem costs. That gives me 3 to spare to grab another creature that's in the graveyard and put it directly into play. You can also choose to discard something that isn't a creature. I will say that I can't think of a situation where I would discard a land, because I always want more land. This deck is a mana hog. The more land you put out, the more activations you can make for Grenzo, and the more is better.
Yeah, so. It is the sole benefit. I mean, it's not the sole benefit. It is a great benefit to having a commander that is in itself a mana sink. Just dump it in. Like, you have extra mana, just do it. Why not? You have nothing to lose.
The other card we were talking about, the Cauldron of Eternity.
Ooh-wee.
Now, the Cauldron of Eternity costs 12. It's 10 and 2 black.
What?
Right. The first line is, this spell costs 2 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard.
How many less?
2 less. So when I play Grenzo, a lot of the time, you end up with 3-4 creatures in your graveyard. That's just the way this deck runs. The creatures are smaller. They get hit by incidental damage. Creatures die.
What?
In this deck.
It's the best thing they do.
Right. So I don't always immediately put them on the bottom of the library, because sometimes you want to save that for a particular creature. Maybe you're looking for a creature that does damage, so that's the one you want on the bottom. Or the next time it's something else or whatever. Mm-hmm. You don't always stack them up, so sometimes they sit in your graveyard. Which means that if there's 3 of them in your graveyard, you're saving 6 mana on this thing, so you just cut the price in half. So now it only costs 6. You can see how this would quickly how the cost of this quickly comes down in a deck like this. So it says, whenever a creature you control dies, put it on the bottom of its owner's library. So all those cards that I was talking about that take cards from your graveyard and put them in your library, this thing is just dodging right around that whole cost. No, if they die, we're just going to put it right to the bottom of the library. Now, that line alone is enough, because what it means is, if you have your sacrifice outlet, like Viscera Seer, sack the creature, scry. Great. Now that creature dies, but it doesn't go to the graveyard, it goes directly to the bottom of your library. You spend 2, put it back out, get the ability, and then use the Seer again. So you're just reducing the cost and making it even easier to get the benefit of a card. Now, this is not an infinite loop. It's going to cost mana, but it costs less, and you'll be able to do it more often. So there's a benefit there. The final one is, for 2 and a black and tap, and pay 2 life. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery.
That's pretty good for, like, getting things back into the loop.
Yes.
Because, like, obviously, say you have 4 creatures in the battle or in the graveyard to make this cheaper. Those 4 creatures don't end up going onto the bottom of the library until you activate that. Or, I mean, obviously you've got like 6 other things to do that as well. But with this out specifically, it is a nice thing to get things back into the loop of, it dies, it goes to the bottom.
Right. Just keep in mind, this one is an artifact. It's not a creature. So Hearthstone isn't going to give you the benefit. But in the end, for the number of times I've played Cauldron of Eternity, and it hasn't been that often, realistically, the only thing that's happening is cards are going directly to the bottom of my library. Yeah. That's how it's benefiting. And that's a big benefit.
Yeah, I mean,
it just is.
Like, sure, it's 3 and tap, so you can activate it once.
Right.
Per round.
Yeah.
And you've got, 4 other things that will put things on the bottom of the library. So you don't need to activate it. Mm-hmm. And with the Cauldron of Eternity, by the time you've drawn it, you've probably started to, like, put things back on the bottom and, like, flip stuff out. So, like, now when you draw it, you just kind of put that on hold until you've got a loaded graveyard.
Yeah.
Hopefully somebody played a Wrath, and then, boom, put it out, and you're on your way.
Right. So it just does a lot. I'm looking forward to getting this into play more often.
Me too. There's a lot to this deck. A lot of typical things that I think you might see in lower powered, lower power as in creature power decks.
Right.
But with that, I think like it does a lot of. You've got some things to boost some things.
Yeah.
You've got your Judith.
There's Mad Auntie.
Yeah.
I will say though, Mad Auntie's there as a way to protect Grenzo.
Makes sense.
I believe Mad Auntie and Grenzo are the only goblins in the deck. I could be wrong, but if there are others, it's incidental.
What are your favorite cards in this deck? What cards make the biggest plays? Or
the funky one that I like that doesn't get a whole lot of shouts from the crowd.
I thought you were going to say Grey Merchant.
No. Herald of Leshrac. We'll get to Grey Merchant in a minute. Herald of Leshrac. Harry is one of my favorite creatures in the deck. It's a 2/4 creature. It costs 7 mana total, 6 and a black.
Oof.
It has flying, but it has a cumulative upkeep of gain control of a land you don't control.
Cumulative upkeep.
Yes.
For those who don't remember, I guess, it gets age counters, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, you add an age counter and then pay its
upkeep.
So
and the
each turn it goes 1, 2, etc.
Right.
Cumulative.
Yes. So the first time you go through and you put an age counter on it, then it essentially says gain control of one land you don't control.
Mm-hmm.
And it says gain control of a land, not gain control of target land. So you can target stuff that's not or you can go after stuff that's not targetable. So you take that land. So your opponent loses it and you get it. And that's huge in this deck because you want more mana. You always want more. And if Herald of Leshrac is around for the next turn, when you flip that up to 2, now you're taking 2 lands. You don't have to target the same person. In fact, I recommend you don't. It's kind of dirty pool to steal 3 lands from one person in 2 rounds. Herald of Leshrac is much more likely to stick around if you spread it a little. At some point, if you get to that 4th age counter, figure out the person who's least likely able to kill it.
Yeah, because at that point you've got 10 lands.
You've got 10 lands, and because you're taking 4 of theirs, you're pushing them down into the point where they're starting to be out of the game.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't even have like each upkeep. It doesn't have to be from the same person,
right?
Which is nifty.
Yeah. The thing for Herald is he gets a +1/+1, or gets +1/+1 for each land that you control but don't own. So after your first upkeep, you now there's now 1 land that you've stolen. So he becomes, instead of a 2/4, a 3/5.
And flying.
Right. And the next round, he's now a 5/7 flyer. This starts to get really ugly, really fast. And the best part is he doesn't have to do damage to take your land. He just has to be on the board.
Yeah. And even going back to, activating Grenzo at end step.
Right.
You get Leshrac out, you get Harry out. And immediately you take somebody's land. You go to your turn and it's like, bam, take somebody's land.
Exactly. So I love this card. And it's not because it goes in sync so perfectly with Grenzo or does something with the bottom of the library. It's because it has 2 power and it grows really fast and it targets opponents' lands. Now, this isn't destroy all lands. This is, I'm going to take 1.
And then I'm going to use it.
And then I'm going to use it. Now, practically speaking, anybody who's playing against me, just tap your land. And then I get your tapped land. And because it's upkeep, the untap's already gone by. So I'm not going to get to use your land until the next turn.
Right.
Whatever. I'll happily wait. You're also not going to get to use your land the next turn.
Right.
So,
it's just 1 land that you didn't have before.
Right. So it's another one of these cards that you rarely see in Commander, and it just fits so nicely in this deck.
Yeah. I think the biggest issue with it is that if you start taking people out with it, you quickly lose those lands.
Yes, and that's the other problem. So it becomes this fine balance of, are they going to take, who can remove it?
Right.
And do they want to?
Right.
So if you swing at somebody that can remove it and he's huge, they'll take it out. If you swing elsewhere Maybe they don't take it out. Maybe they're happy to see you kill off another opponent.
Yeah.
Whatever. You have to make that balance. You have to make that balance work.
And if you're like me, you get to play with, I don't know, maybe you get lucky and you get to play with a Maze of Ith or a Gaia's Cradle.
Right.
What are you going to do with a bunch of green mana in this deck? You're going to activate...
You're going to activate Grenzo many, many times.
Many times.
Yes. Because I don't care what color it produces. as long as I can activate Grenzo, we're good to go. One of the other ones that has gotten a lot more attention lately in our group is Olivia Voldaren.
Especially now that she's married. Now, this is the original Olivia. So back then, she was a 3/3 with flying. She cost 4. It was 2 a black and a red. Her first ability was for 1 and a red. Olivia Voldaren deals 1 damage to another target creature. That creature becomes a vampire in addition to its other creature types, and then you put a +1/+1 counter onto Olivia. So this, a lot like Herald, is a way to make Olivia much bigger. Mm-hmm. So spend 2, get it a little bigger, and that way when it swings, it kind of hits harder than it would as a 3/3 flyer. The next ability, though, is for 3 black and a black. Gain control of target vampire for as long as you control Olivia Voldaren. Well, you're making their creatures into vampires when you hit them. So you can go after their biggest creature, do 1 point of damage to it, and then spend 5 to take it. Now, these are both creature abilities. So again... Hearthstone kicks butt with this whole deck. It's amazing how many times I've played against this deck and Hearthstone's come out, and I didn't realize Hearthstone is symmetrical.
Yes, Hearthstone works for your opponents as well. So it's something that you can keep in mind when you're playing against it. But the deck really does load up.
And as like a side note too, like this ramp package includes Crypt, Gas, and Trees in this Ogre. So like it is not terribly much to start stealing everybody's things with Olivia.
Well, and that's what we found in some of the more recent games. I will quite often sit on it, wait.
Like the fonts.
Right. And when the attack comes my way, I can use Olivia to just simply take the attacking creature. Or take a creature from somewhere else and use that to block. However, whatever you want to do. It's
also not until end of turn, like a lot of threat effects.
Right.
Granted, you're paying a lot of mana for it. Yes. So like you better be keeping it. But...
Right. And when Olivia leaves, you lose all these creatures. So generally, I do my best not to use Olivia. Right. I would prefer to sit there with the 7 mana, and then when my last opponent says go, I'm not going to then use it to take your great creature. I'm going to use 7 mana to activate Grenzo 3 times. Or 7 times if I'm lucky. But that's sort of where this deck goes. But Olivia has done some great work and has become a primary target when I play it. So yeah, I've really enjoyed Olivia.
With all the good news out of the way, what are some of the flops in this deck? Or what are some of the things that you're like, this does okay, but it's not what I want to do?
Okay.
Or maybe other adjective.
Okay, well let's just talk about Grey Merchant of Asphodel. I don't want to save it to be the last card to talk about with the deck.
Don't worry.
So Grey Merchant, for those who don't know, is a 2/4 creature. It costs 5 mana. It's 3 a black and a black. It says, when Grey Merchant of Asphodel enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. So if I flip Grey Merchant off the bottom of my library, I've paid 2 mana. Grey Merchant comes out, looks around the board. Now, if it's just Grey Merchant and Grenzo, the devotion is 3. All of my opponents each lose 3 life, and I gain 9 because they've each lost 3 life if I've got 3 opponents.
And that's at instant speed.
That's at instant speed. That's if it's just Grey Merchant and Grenzo on the battlefield. That doesn't happen. So realistically, you can say that the devotion is probably going to be 5 or more when you flip Grey Merchant.
Yeah, I mean, even with just like a quick scan of this deck, you've got, 8 or 9 other creatures that have double black pips.
Yes, there is a lot of double black in the deck. Mostly because I don't care about the mana cost. I'm flipping them off the bottom. So who cares if it costs 2 black or 1 or 3 or however much?
Yeah,
That's one
of my favorite things about this deck is that it looks at those high cost creatures. Like if you look at the curve of this deck, it is wild. Yeah. And it's because you're putting them out for 2. That's the deal.
Right. Now, the thing is, so if Grey Merchant comes out and my devotion is 5, everybody loses 5. I gain 15. And by itself, that sounds like fun. That sounds like a big card, a big swing. I've had times when my devotion was 12. And that ends a game quick. Or at least it puts a real hammer down on your opponents. Mm-hmm. The trick then becomes, now he's there to block. So your opponents won't swing at you because they know that if the Grey Merchant dies, you are going to get it back onto the bottom of your library and you're going to do it again.
Yeah.
Because why wouldn't you? That's another 15 points of damage. That's another 15 points of damage you're dealing out to your opponents. It's another 15 life. It works out really well. The problem is, and this was coming up at the start of when I first built the deck, Grey Merchant was proving to be the way to end games. Mm-hmm. Meaning almost the only way this deck won. So I would find a way to get it, find a way to sack it, whether it was Viscera Seer or some other way to get rid of it and get it back onto the bottom. I can recall more than one game where I managed to sack it twice in the same turn and recast it. So I ended up, so the enter the battlefield trigger went off 3 times in one turn, and I won that game because of that. That's all well and good, but when it started to feel like the only way I could win was with this Grey Merchant, and I'm like, okay, well, this isn't working. So I took the Grey Merchant out of the deck because I don't want it to be a one-trick pony. I want to see what else happens. The problem was nothing else was happening. The deck was just sitting there spinning its wheels, looking like it was doing lots of stuff, but it wasn't getting anywhere. Yeah. So I went through and rehashed a lot of cards and looked at cards like Olivia Valdarin, looked at Herald of Leshrac, looked at Haunt of Hightower, and some of these, and some other cards that do big things. And that started to work. And then I put Grey Merchant back in because I felt like at that point, I wasn't just waiting for this card.
It was a piece in your utility belt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, Grey Merchant is just that good. Having said that, I don't mind flipping it over. I just don't want... I always get nervous when I flip it over and know that, okay, I have 2 ways to activate it from the graveyard.
Yeah, get it back out there as many times as you can.
Right.
Because it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so you're doing your best to block with it. You're doing whatever you can to try and kill this creature.
Right.
And, I mean, hopefully your opponents are not helping you out. But, it's just not as fun as it was the first few times I cast it.
Yeah,
I'm not taking it out, but...
Yeah, your opponents are waiting until they have enough to just kill you outright before you have a chance to reactivate.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite cards in this deck is Deathbringer Thoktar. Because I feel like I don't see this card nearly enough.
Right.
Probably because it's 6 mana at 3/3.
Yeah.
It's 4 black and a red. Creature zombie beast, a 3/3. So for a zombie, you'd figure probably see a lot of play. But whenever another creature dies, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Deathbringer Thoktar. Then it has an activated ability. Remove a +1/+1 counter from Deathbringer Thoktar. Deathbringer Thoktar deals 1 damage to target creature or player. As somebody who plays a lot of tokens, this scares me because you just machine gun down 1/1s 4 days.
Yeah, it's essentially free.
Yeah, or I guess any X1, but
yeah,
it's beautiful.
The other part with the Thoktar, it's the sack outlet. So if I can if Thokdar has 4+ and +1 counters on it, I won't hesitate to use that to get rid of Grey Merchant. Puts it in the graveyard and lets me loop around.
Makes sense, yeah.
And you can do that with other creatures that you control. Now, ideally, you're not doing that, but
yeah,
if need be, you can.
Now it's got. I mean, it's two target. Oh, it is target creature or player. Never mind. I was gonna say this works nicely with a card that you're interested in putting in this deck. You've got a nice little couple cards here.
Yes.
That you're trying to put in. I was going to say it works nicely with Brash Taunter. Brash Taunter says when it's dealt damage, if it deals that much damage to target opponent, it is indestructible. So it's essentially like a stuffy doll.
Yeah.
But Deathbringer Thokdar does say to players, so never mind.
But either way, Brash Taunter is one of the new cards that I want that I haven't put in the deck yet, but is going in the deck very soon. And just because, hey, a 1/1 indestructible and
has an activated ability.
Right. And if I know it's on the bottom of my library, my opponent may not know that it's there, so they can swing in.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they're now faced with a Brash Taunter blocking their 7/7, which they didn't think was, which they hoped that the only thing was going to block was Grenzo.
Right.
Surprise.
And along the same play pattern of getting things out right before your turn, the hardest thing with Brash Taunter is just waiting until you can activate it.
Right.
So, put it out before your turn. Now it has faux haste, and because it's now your turn, and
right, and then you're spending 3 and a red to tap it, and fight,
2 and a red, yeah,
or 2 and a red. Again,
or 1
another
red.
creature that Hearthstone helps out with. But yeah, so I love that idea.
I like these two other additions.
Another goblin in the deck.
Yeah, right. I like these two other additions too.
Okay.
You've got Desecrated Tomb, which says whenever one or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. Now, it's great for blocking. Because you're going to be generating so many bats.
Right. Now, just to explain, a lot of people when they see Grenzo working, when I use it, I pick up the library, flip over the bottom card because I want it to be dramatic and fun. What Grenzo does say, though, is you're supposed to take that card and put it in your graveyard. And now, if it's a creature that has power and toughness equal to or less than Grenzo, then it enters the battlefield. So it's going from the graveyard to the battlefield. That's why this card is so good in Grenzo.
Yeah, because essentially, ideally, you're taking it from your graveyard, putting it on the bottom of your library. Got a bat. Then you're flipping with Grenzo, and it's going to your graveyard, and then you play it from your graveyard. You get another bat.
Right.
Fantastic. Every time it's 2 bats.
Right.
The thing about this is that very quick overlook of your deck, you're generally not putting more than 1 card out of your graveyard at a time. Like it's usually you're saying you're activating Grenzo 5 times. So you just flip 5 cards. That's 5 different activations.
Yes.
So you are getting
5
bats.
Yes.
If all goes well.
Yeah.
Now, your last card that you're interested in putting in, it's so good. I mean, we've seen it on game nights. Seen it on game nights. Seen it, other places. Florian Valdarin Scion. 1 black and a red. 3/3. Legendary creature, Vampire Noble. First strike. Great. That's okay. Fine. It's a 3/3, which is important because it activates with Grenzo.
Yeah.
Where X is 1. At the beginning of your post-combat main phase, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the total amount of life your opponents lost this turn. Exile 1 of those cards and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. That part's yeah. You may play the exiled card this turn.
Okay. Couple things. Grenzo rarely does a ton of damage.
Right.
So I look at Florian and I say, I'm picturing times when I do 3 points of damage. So if I do 3 points of damage, I take those 3 cards, look at them, exile the one that's not a creature.
Right.
Put the other 2 on the bottom. Now, In a random order, well, I've got 2 cards.
There's a good chance
it's the bottom one or the next one.
Yeah.
And I know that. In situations where I've done 10 damage, well, then Florian becomes a lot more shotgun-like.
Right.
It becomes a little more chaotic. I like Florian mostly because I have found that the deck really wants Hearthstone. And if I can do 5 damage and look at 5 cards, and one of them is Hearthstone, I can exile Hearthstone, put the other ones on the bottom, whether they're creatures or lands or artifacts or whatever. Right. I'm getting Hearthstone.
Yeah, you get Hearthstone for, what is it, 3?
Right. So essentially, I see Florian as, scry X, where X is the amount of damage you did in combat. I'm okay with that. If it means it mucks up the bottom of my library, then it mucks up the bottom of my library.
But if you're getting Hearthstone out of it, it becomes significantly cheaper to chew through those 10 cards.
Right. Right.
Or I guess those 9 other cards.
Yeah.
It comes from a 20 mana activation for all 10 of those cards to 3 for Hearthstone and then 9 for the other cards. So it's down to 12, which is, not insignificant, but you probably know, you definitely know what creatures are there, so you know when to stop.
Well, and this is just it. So, Hearthstone, Cryptghast. Cryptghast I'm not going to put on the bottom of my library. I'm going to exile that so I can cast it, because I don't want it to be one of 5 cards that I'm digging for.
Yeah.
I want it to come out now. Yeah. So I'll pay the 4 instead of 2.
Unless X is 2, and then you've got Cryptghast and, whatever.
But, right. But I want to try Florian. I want to see
It's nice, too, because with Florian, it is... You may play the exiled card. So if you have Florian out, don't play your land before combat. Wait until you look at the top whatever cards. Right. Choose a land to exile. And then you can just play it.
Right. And like you said, you don't have to play it. It may turn out that, you're looking at the cards you have, and it's like, okay, well, that one, I don't even want to see it in the graveyard.
Right.
It'll
just stay exiled.
Like, if you've got 2 lands, this deck doesn't really have a way to get lands out of the graveyard, so you can exile it if you're not worried about casting it or whatever. I wanted to try Florian, at least in part, because I felt like this deck wasn't chaotic enough. The whole idea of pulling from the bottom is that there's supposed to be this sense of, I don't know what's there. Who knows what it could be? And you flip it to find out. This deck really clamps down on that. So there are times when you'll be flipping blindly, but not as often as the deck could be if you built it, with that in mind. There are a lot of other cards that if I were to take out the entire control package, I could throw in another 10 crazy creatures and add some ramp and do some other stuff.
Yeah.
To really just be like, at the end of the turn, I'm spending all my mana over and over and over again and never knowing what I'm going to flip.
Yeah. And I think the cool thing, too, is that with Florian, it is loss of life. Yeah. So say you have Cryptghast out, you have Florian out, you don't want to attack because you'll lose one of them. Play something else, or even you have Cryptghast out, you play Florian out, you extort him, everybody takes 1. You gain 3? Is that how extort works? Or you gain 1?
3.
And then second main phase, because it's total of all of your opponents, you get to X is 3.
Right.
Like it is nice that you don't have to necessarily work very hard to make X big for that.
Right. I'm also curious to see a card like Grey Merchant. So if Grey Merchant hits everyone for 10, then everyone has lost 30. Then I'm flipping 30 cards. I get to exile 1, and the other 29 go underneath on a random order. So in essence, the bottom of your library is now just random because there's that many. But I get a kick out of that idea.
Yeah. Wasn't Teferi's puzzle box
interesting
in this deck at one point?
It was. It came out
Just a lot. Just took up a lot of time.
It took a lot of time. My opponents hated it.
Okay.
Well, they hated not having
consistency,
any level of control. So, like, I have, like, Mind Moil is essentially Teferi's puzzle box, but just for me. So, you know, this way my opponents don't have to worry. And in the end, if your opponents are drawing that many cards, it's only a matter of time until they find a way to get rid of Teferi's puzzle box.
Yeah.
Or whatever else. So I pulled it out. Now, yeah, so I'm looking forward to Florian. We'll see how it actually plays out. And, you know, if it's not something I want to keep in, then we'll pull it out. Like I said, the deck's had a number of iterations. I don't hesitate to take cards out. There's plenty of other cards that can go in. Yeah. Something the deck does need, though, is more flyers. It's a lot harder to find flying creatures when you get down into these lower levels, which is why stuff like Olivia and Herald of the Shrak are so popular for me.
Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's always room for some cards to come out. Immolation Shaman is proving to be not quite as good as I thought it was, or I thought it was going to be. You know, there's Erratic Portal, which is I thought was going to be a way for me to keep Grenzo's cost low, to just sort of have it out there, and if somebody tries to get rid of Grenzo, I can activate it, bring Grenzo to my hand. It just hasn't been.
Yeah,
it's rarely getting used.
Yeah,
so
especially
it's a
for
slot that really doesn't need.
Especially for essentially a three mana
commander. Yeah,
3 mana commander. Like, his cost isn't going to get too high unless like people are actively removing him every time he comes down.
Yeah, and I will say the way this deck is set up, if Grenzo becomes inordinately expensive, I can play off the top. I do have ways to get stuff out of the graveyard and onto the battlefield, as opposed to always into the library. But you know, so it can run without Grenzo. It's not nearly as effective, and it's definitely not nearly as much fun.
Yeah.
But if worse comes to worse, you can do that. So yeah, it's one of those cards that, or this deck is now a deck where I don't even need to look at the new cards to see what the updates are, because everybody knows I run Grenzo. And if anybody sees something that says bottom of your library, and it could go in Grenzo, I find out.
It's always so nice.
I'm always told.
I love this community.
So yeah.
So let's start to wrap things up.
All right.
Something I completely forgot to mention at the beginning of the episode, because we're recording this at the end of November. This is our first episode of 2022.
Ho!
Amazing. It is January 5th as of release.
Man. Christmas just flew by. It's like I missed it.
Oh, God, we've got a month until Christmas. Oh, no. Pardon me while I finish this extremely long episode.
Yes.
But it's been so fun. I love this deck. I can't wait to play against it.
Obviously, I love this deck.
Yeah.
If I can talk for this long, and we never once mentioned most of the cards in the ramp, or the card draw, or the removal package. If you want to know about these cards,
we've got the list.
The list is posted, and quite honestly, find creatures that cost less than X if you want to build Grenzo, and just include those.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many variables with this deck. Like, I've got at least 15 cards in here that are probably not optimal, but they're fun for me. Find cards that you think are cool and run those instead.
It's got a ring to it. Because we're Temple of Falspot, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Have a great night. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Have a great night. Have a great year. And may your fifth land be the temple. Always be the temple. May your fifth land always be the temple. Oh my God, it's the new year. Happy New Year.
Yeah, I trampled all over it.
Yeah.
So now I can't say bye. Bye.
You did it anyway. Wait. Before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter at falsepodmtg. Bruce is at ManaBurned, and I'm at Andy Weekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, like, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your fifth land be the temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!